have action items. We have a number of those, which was really our purpose in scheduling this additional meeting, which is the consideration of the superintendent recommendation to adjust the calendar, the consideration of approval of the school physician job description and stipend, consideration of approval of the superintendent recommendation for a 3% increase to the preschool fee for the 2022-23 school year, consideration of approval of policy BDB, and consideration of approval of Murphy, Lemire, and Murphy for legal representation. Following that, I will just tell us right now, our next meetings are July 26th at 9:30. It will also be virtual. A pending joint meeting with the select board, August 9th at 9:30, again virtual, and August 30th at 6 p.m., which is our workshop. After our regular meeting, we have to adjourn to executive session for purpose 2 to discuss strategy with respect to negotiating non-union administrative contracts, and purpose 3 to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Winchester Education Association. In both cases, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. We will not be taking any public action as a result of the executive session, or do not intend to, and therefore will not be reconvening in open session for adjournment, or we have not intended to. And then we hope to adjourn by 6:15. We had 2 members who have a hard stop at 6:15, so we will try to move through these things as quickly as we can, with still having discussion where we need to. I do not have any communications today. Dr. Hackett, do you? We just met recently.
I do not, Madam Chair.
Excellent. Then we can move on to public comments.
We have 2 attendees this evening. We actually, which has not been a practice that we've used when we have been fully in remote, but for this evening's meeting, we actually did a Google Doc or form sign up process like we do when we are requesting people to sign up for remote public participation when we're in person. And we did not have any participants sign up for that. And as I can see in the attendees, we have 2 attendees, one of whom is WinCam, and Ms. Conley is also with us this evening.
And given that Ms. Conley has not signed up for public comments, we will anticipate that she is just here to listen to the meeting. And
with enthusiasm.
Yes, exactly. So we will move on to our reports and discussion items. The first item is looking at our approved 2022-23 school calendar. We have been notified by Town Hall that there is going to be conflict on September 6th, as there is a state election announced on that day. Given our move to a single location site at the high school, we have some concerns about having students in the building the same day as a statewide election. So I believe Dr. Hackett has a proposal, which he has also discussed with the union about what to do about that conflict and what a possible solution for us might be.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, everybody. So this is the calendar as it was approved several months ago, actually February 8th, 2022. As you recall, our first scheduled student day under this calendar would have been, or is currently, as it is approved, on Wednesday, August 31st. And we had a early release day that day for K through 5. The following day, September 1, we had an early release day for kindergarten, preceded by the 29th and the 30th as full teacher workshop days, one of which is generally has been to come in, have teachers come in and get their things in order, building meetings and that kind of thing, and then the other one being a full-blown workshop day put together by central office and directors and coordinators. Then we had a early release day on no school day on Friday, which would be the 2nd, and a no school day is because of Labor Day on September 5, and then full students day back in on the 6th. So with the late announcement, or in talking to Mary Ellen at Town Hall, the town clerk, there was kind of a late announcement about when the state election was going to be held. We now have a conflict with the 6th because that is the date of the state election. I just want to be clear that the town, Mary Ellen, and no one in town management has asked us to do anything with that. This is just in conversation um, internally around just how difficult it will be, because as you know, all of the voting now is at the high school. We just feel that it will be quite difficult for our students and staff, and for people who are voting, parents, as well as parents in and out of the school, when we have a full day of voting happening at the high school. So what we'd like to propose to you this evening for consideration would be to essentially just take one of those 2 workshop days that we had at the beginning of the year and move it to the 6th, Tuesday the 6th. So under this calendar, we would start with a workshop day. Our first early release K through 5 day would be on the 30th. Our early release for K would be on the 31st. I was just doing that little rhyme in my head. And then we would have the full student day would actually happen on the 1st. We would remain with no school on the Friday, the 2nd, no school Labor Day on the 5th, and then we would return teachers for a full workshop day on the 6th, with students returning again on the 7th. What this adjustment does for us is it allows us not to add days to the end of the school year. And it keeps our students and the majority of our students and parents, I know there's a lot of going on at that time of year, but we'll be off-site. So it'll be, we think, safer and easier for our kids, for our staff, and also for the voting public. So that is for your consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
And Dr. Hackett, I'd also just chime in that we've also confirmed that both the 6th and the 29th, 30th, I had to do it in my head too. The 30th are not, do not conflict with any state, federal, or major religious holidays per our calendar that's on our website.
Correct.
Does anybody have any questions? And Dr. Hackett, could you also show the end of the year? Because I believe that the end of the year, the reason that you look to go to the beginning, can we see the end? So we have a unique situation at the end of the year too, where our first makeup day for snow day would be the 15th, which would end there. So if we push it out to the last day and add it on to the last day of school, we are almost certain to go past Juneteenth. Whereas if we add it, isn't that not correct? If we add it to the beginning of the year, there is at least the possibility that we might be able to end school on the 16th of June.
That is correct.
Questions from the committee, comments? Mr. Brady, I see your hand.
Thank you. I appreciate this solution. I think it fits cleanly, so thank you for that. I just bring up again that I still have an interest in us adding the federal holidays and religious holidays to this calendar. I see the calendar as a teaching tool. I know I may be in the minority on that opinion, but I just wanted to reiterate it.
And I would just say, thank you, Mr. Brady. I know that that's an interest of yours. And I think if the committee has interest in that, we could add it to a future agenda item. But since we narrowly focus this item on just changing these 2 days, I'm going to ask that we stick to the discussion, on the added day right now. And if there's interest, we could add that as a future agenda item. Mr. Hopcroft.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also recall on the vacations that I believe Dr. Hackett did publish them somewhere. And I don't remember if it's like on the back side of this or if it's next to it on the website, but just as a recollection on that. My comment here, I'm supportive of this change and just wonder a little bit about any impact on election turnout as people may take another day off on the Labor Day vacation. And so it just remind people to get their absentee ballots if they plan to be away, and otherwise try to get back in time to vote.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Hopcroft. Unfortunately, yeah, we're not setting the date the town is for this. So that could be an issue either way, but yeah, totally agree. Mr. Nixon.
Thank you. Yeah, and I also just want to acknowledge Mr. Brady's comment on religious observances. So on the district website, there is a link to religious observances, and it's actually right next to the calendar. It's not on it. And it looks like it's an earlier publication from the, forgive me, the Network for Social Justice, but it was printed back when they were known by another name. So anyway, it's helpful that it's there, but I think it's a good conversation to sort of keep moving forward. So I guess I want to I'll ask a dumb question. Why? So over the years, due to circumstances beyond the district's control, we've had days where, you know, a school was closed, others weren't. We do rely on the high school for cooking and food distribution, for instance, to the elementary schools. I think to a much lesser degree, McCall, if at all. Could we not consider like a day off for Winchester High School, and stick with a plan for everybody else? And then of course we'd have to add on a day for Winchester High School, but we could do that.
Certainly consideration. We decided not to go in that direction, primarily because it just throws the calendar off for everybody. It's just a little bit easier, less hectic to be, I think, consistent across the board. We also took into consideration that there are, in some cases, it could create some issues for parents with children who are at multiple levels. But there's no, other than that, there's no real pressing reason to not go in that direction. We just thought this was cleaner.
So I want to follow that line of thinking. So if I'm a parent of, you know, a younger kid, I've got a calendar I've already seen because the school committee's approved it. And so if elementary and middle school operate on the calendar we approved, there's no change. If a high school kid has a day off, they have the day off, but we just have to tack that day on at the end of the calendar, right? I mean, it wouldn't affect things like, well, there really isn't a parent-teacher conference week at the high school anyway, but wouldn't really affect our professional development days or anything like that. It would basically be a tack-on day for the high school, right?
It would be a tack-on day, and generally, and I will just speak for this year, just coming fresh off of this year with the last day of school, and also being familiar with school systems that went until last Friday. I am really happy that we got out when we got out this year, yeah. And I also think, to the chair's point, the Juneteenth holiday does push us out another day. If we were to have more than one snow day, in that case, we would be into the week of the 18th, would actually be there on the 20th. So again, the effort was to not push the school year out. It does keep us consistent pre-K through 12, which is part of the goal for us too. Whether that's necessary to be a goal or not is probably debatable.
Okay, well, I at least wanted to understand if it had been considered.
It had. Thank you.
I'd like to take Ms. Bolognese next.
I guess in looking at this, I'm appreciative of the work that's been done on it and the thought that's been put into it. I think that this is I think this is a fairly straightforward solution, and I like that it does not, or at least as Ms. Bergstrom was saying, gives us the chance at the end of the school year of not going past June 16th, I believe it was, if there were a snow day. But who knows? We are in New England, and there could be more, but at least there's a chance. So I think if our union was in support of it, which I believe they were, and I think that this is just fairly straightforward and simple.
I think my record speaks for itself. Oh, I'm sorry. I think my record speaks for itself here in Winchester. I don't do more than one snow day, so after one year.
And I will also add, and then I will go back to Mr. Hopcroft and Mr. Brady. I think also, Mr. Nixon, we have to consider that if there is one school level that is off, there may still be other parents with students in multiple grades that may need to have some students back, or some students then go a day later. I think when we're talking in the middle of a school year where it can be made up over time, that it's a little bit different. I think it's going to be more challenging and more consistent for all families to be able to do the same thing at the beginning and the end of the school year. I think this might be a different conversation if it might be falling in the middle of the year.
I appreciate that. I just want to at least be sure it had been considered, so we give some voice to why that's not a preferred option.
Absolutely. Mr. Hopcroft, I believe you were next, and then Mr. Brady.
I'm thinking next. I think Mr. Brady was ahead of me,
Okay.
but I'm happy to.
Might as-
I'll jump in.
You're
Okay.
already speaking. Might as well
I'm
go.
speaking.
Everyone will have a turn.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick up on Mr. Nixon's comments. I thought that was a very interesting and innovative solution. It actually gets to some of the points I was making on election turnout, which I know isn't really our primary thing here, but if we treated it, on the normal schedule that we were on for elementary and middle school, it's just like business as usual, the schedule we published, and people are in town. They have the convenience of not having to attend to their little kids, so they could actually, get out and vote. Whereas the high school kids, probably could stay home on their own or make use of that time. I'm just curious, and I guess this is for Dr. Hackett, whether in Mr. Nixon's proposal, would it be possible to, how integrated is the teacher professional development? Could you have the high school teacher professional development switch with that date, or is it really tied in with middle school and elementary?
I'll let Ms. Kirby speak to that.
Yeah, that was what I was considering. It very much is a pre-K through 12 day. And especially at the start of the school year, we typically will have must-do PD on that day. And so it would be a little more challenging. We could still do it, to have to tease that out.
Now, Mr. Brady, I believe you are up.
Thank you. I just wanted to appreciate Mr. Nixon's point. I actually had made that same recommendation a number of weeks ago, so I do agree that it's a nice idea. And I guess regardless of what we do, I just want to name the fact that if we are now not having school on that Tuesday for elementary students, we're either asking working families to take a day off of work or spend at least $160 for childcare. It's roughly $20 an hour. That's pretty much the going rate. So regardless of what we do, I just want us to acknowledge that that's what we're doing to those families who have two working parents and maybe don't have a family member who can watch the kids for free. No comment either way, but I think that's just something we have to own if we're going to make that decision.
How is that different than putting it on the end of the year, Mr. Brady? I'm curious.
Well, I think on the end of the year, you're more likely to have camps available and things like that, versus if you're doing it right after school has started, there's not going to be many opportunities for families to have something that's integrated. It's going to be a one-off.
Mr. Nixon.
Thanks. So first of all, I just want to clarify, I was actually asking a question. It wasn't so much a proposal or a suggestion, but people have called it that, which makes me think maybe people are thinking about this. So let me circle back on this and suggest, to pick up on Mr. Brady's point, timing is an issue here too. So we're already into the summer, so families have made all sorts of plans. We're obviously a lot closer to the beginning of the year than we are at the end. And I agree with Mr. Brady that, if we tack on a day at the end of the year, there's all sorts of runway to plan for that and seize opportunities. Though, to be fair, we're not really going to know when the end of school is until we're into like March and we're out of winter, and how many snow days did we or didn't we have. I guess my only other comment on this would be, I thought there were multiple sort of factors in this calculus about consolidating our elections. But this idea about pulling them out of the elementary schools and out of McCall so that it wouldn't disturb the school day was certainly one of them. So I am struggling somewhat with the idea that we have a central polling place at the high school, and therefore it's going to have an impact on the other 6 school buildings. I struggle with that a little bit. If there is an opportunity to kind of stick with the schedule that we have, I had not thought about the juggle of the PD that Ms. Kirby just spoke to, and that is super important. So I'm not making a motion, I'm not making a proposal, but I will say I think My preference would be, only because we have no idea what winter will bring, I think my preference would be to stick with the calendar we voted and make a change at the high school. If for no other reason than to leave that significant school population alone. Yes, there are families with kids at multiple schools. I get that. I've been one of them. That we might do well to go down this path and sort of see how this goes and learn from it, because if there will be other elections on school days, we're going to have to deal with this in a similar fashion and decide, is this then going to impact the entire district, or does it impact one school, where there are a substantial number of students? So my preference would be to go that route, but I'm not gonna say that this is a bad proposal from Dr. Hackett. It's not. It's one way or the other, there's going to be an impact on somebody.
And I would just add, Mr. Nixon, that I think it necessitates a conversation with the town about whether our high school is the best space in town to use as a single polling place on a school day moving forward, or if the town might perhaps have other spaces to use, given that either way, we're affecting over 1,200 students or over 4,000 students to have an election on a school day.
Town Hall has a real nice auditorium.
Right, correct, Mr. Brady. Dr. Hackett?
No, thank you. And I appreciate all the points that have been made by everybody. And I just want to, be clear that we weren't asked to do this at all. I do think that there would be some advantage. Just my preference would be make no change and stay as we are. What I think then do this or do any other change, including just not coming in for the high school on that day. Because I do think any adjustment signals that we're willing to continue to make that adjustment, which is, I think, is kind of part of the discussion that you're having. This would provide a real live opportunity to see how this works at the high school, and may force some conversations that you're suggesting that maybe there's a better polling location. This just came up again because, from my perspective, it would be preferable, and certainly if this was all at one elementary school, it would be this would be a lot different conversation than the one we're having. But it would be preferable if the site was less congested on that day. But again, it is late. I appreciate all those comments. I do think that it could be a problem for some families, and that's certainly not our intent. We're just trying to be a little bit more accommodating and just trying to take in consideration those people who are trying to come in and vote, as well as staff and who are traveling between buildings, who have to find a place to park when they come back from another building they might be attending. Just some of those logistics that would be a little bit problematic, or at least inconvenient.
Dr. Hackett, are you suggesting that an alternative to this proposal would be to just have students in the high school on this voting day?
I would suggest, as I began to immediately regret making this proposal. No, I'm kidding. That if I'd rather have you do nothing than change it to something other than what we have currently.
Okay. Ms. Bolognese.
I think I was just about to clarify this or ask the same thing. So you're saying, or now we're saying, keep the calendar as is and keep school going as is in the high school as well, and just can go ahead and conduct the election within the high school gym or gym.
Correct. Stay status quo.
Yep.
Got it.
Mr. Hopcroft, did you have anything to add?
I think you maybe couldn't see my digital hand. I've been up for a while, so I was doing my in-person hand. I actually, congestion is certainly, an issue. I don't love the idea of having, everyone in town, coming into the building while the students are there. Just from a security point of view, it seems very open, and I can't quite recall if there is a separation between the parts of the school that we use. Is it completely secured? They're two separate things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And are there
separate entrances and exits? I would be my answer to your question. Completely secured is not my answer.
Yeah, so anyway, I would think the two concerns I'd have, so I thought it was a good proposal that you brought forth today, Dr. Hackett. And the two things that I think about besides the congestion are, is there an ability for someone to wander off from the polling area into the rest of the school? And how would we secure that? And certainly, law enforcement or others, could certainly keep the two areas secure, maybe with locked doors. I don't know the exact thing. And the other is just the parking. It's hard enough for voting and stuff. How much parking is available on a day when the school is in use, and where do the voters park? So my preference is actually to do something. And I'm not opposed to your proposal, Dr. Hackett, although I was going to ask through the chair to Mr. Brady with regard to the impact on parents. I preferred the idea of swapping with a day at the beginning of the year rather than adding a day at the end of the year. And I'm wondering if that impact on parents, because it's a matter of a week, childcare, seems might be more similar than in the summertime when you can put them in a camp or something. But anyway, so my preference would be to do either Dr. Hackett's original proposal or Mr. Nixon's proposal that he had put forth, rather than having everyone in there.
Chair, could I just clarify? I just want to be clear for the public and for you as a committee that I am not making this recommendation under any circumstances because we're concerned about security. I have full confidence in the town's ability to carry out this election. We'll have good police coverage and good polling coverage, and that's not a concern. Just to be clear.
You say that I wasn't suggesting that there is a concern. I've just always been a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that the public is in there while students are in there. I wasn't suggesting that anything was unsafe.
Let me rephrase. Mr. Hopcroft and I were not suggesting that there's any concerns around security if we did it this way.
And Dr. Hackett, to your point, though, if we kept the calendar as is and saw what it was like to have an election on a school day, it might bring up some alternative options to using the high school on a school day. Because certainly we would have to let the town know that the parking lot at the high school would pretty much be unavailable to voters if students are in school. And it would also necessitate, it would by its very nature necessitate additional support from the police department, as any election would. And it would also direct anybody that is holding signs or anything like that would have to only be in designated areas because there are students in the building. So it might allow us to see how those two things overlap and whether a single voting polling place in the high school during an election is really a feasible alternative or not. Mr. Hopcroft?
I thought it was worth asking whether I assume the polling place is already been set as the high school and can't be changed at this point.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Mr. Brady?
I'll just add it at this point, thinking about all of it and even thinking about what you just said, Madam Chair, it would be quite the interesting experience for the high school students to be able to see the democracy in action, both when they enter the school and when they exit the school. So I would advocate for the do nothing and let us have school with the students and let people vote at the high school during that time. I know parking will be tight at certain times, but I can tell you at 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. when I vote, parking will be fine. And I managed to vote during, that 3-hour window from 5 to 8. So I imagine most people can. And obviously it's not perfect, but having had voting at my elementary school in multiple districts, it will be just fine. And we had similar parking things and it was just fine. You should see the lot at my current school. It's not even enough for our staff and people managed to park and vote. It wasn't the whole city, but it was still a substantial amount of people for the space that we have. So I'm an advocate of doing nothing and having us find out how it goes.
So I think we've had a pretty robust discussion about this. If nobody has any new information or anything further to add, we do have this on for consideration directly following this discussion. If people are comfortable doing so, if somebody is interested in making a motion on this item, I am happy to accept one.
I would make a motion to maintain the calendar as is and have school on the election day for all grade levels.
Ms. Bolanese?
Couldn't we also just have consensus not to take this up and keep the calendar as is?
Dr. Hackett, what would your preference be for moving forward on this and having discussions with the town about what the day looks like?
I don't think it matters. I think it's a good suggestion by Ms. Bolognese to, if you're not going to take any action on the existing calendar, then probably no action needs to be taken at all.
Mr. Hopcroft?
Let me say, because I don't have my hand, you could see earlier, so I'll try to use my regular one as well. You know, I first of all, I agree that if no action is taken, then we don't need a vote. And I'm generally fine going along with that consensus. And I agree with Mr. Brady that, you know, I'm quite capable of finding parking, and I often come early or late and do that as well. I do worry about you know, a lot of the elderly folks in our town who I have in-laws in town, for instance, who can't walk very far, and so you know, it's harder. But if we're making any changes, you know, I'm fine with that for now.
Mr. Nixon, final comments?
Just following up on a question, it was either from Mr. Hopcroft or Mr. Brady. So because this is a state election and the Secretary of State changed the date of the primary, and it's a different process than a municipal one, so the high school is basically fixed as the polling location, where we don't have the kind of flexibility we would in a municipal election. That's
Right.
all.
So, Mr. Brady, are you willing to withdraw your motion?
Happily withdrawn.
Then if we have consensus to keep the calendar as is and move forward, we can move on to our next consideration of approval of the school physician job description. Dr. Hackett, do you have that to pull up for us? So this is a new draft of our school physician job description. Ms. Markham has been working with some folks in the community and hearing responses from physicians in the community about some of the responsibilities that were required as this, and in rethinking what she needs, she has rewritten this job description to still follow Mass General State Law per what we are required to have for a school physician. But also making some changes, but we do not have a red line version here, do we, Dr. Hackett?
My apologies, we do not.
Okay. Would you like to highlight the specific changes that Ms. Markham has made?
I think probably your summary is the best summary, Madam Chair, is that this is really just a very much a what exactly are we required to have the school physician do under the law. We did go out, we have posted the position. We did have an initial interest from someone who then was not interested, and there was concern that part of the reason for the change in heart was the fact that the job description seemed a little overwhelming for someone who would really be in effect, essentially we're talking about, as we know, this is an honorarium more than it is a stipend, and the feeling is that let's go out, let's get this position filled because it is required, and let's just keep it to the basics and then see how it goes from there. I mean, a lot of it, as you know, depends on the person, as we've had very good fortune in having a prior school physician who just did a lot for us. That may not be the case this time, and it may be the case this time, but if we do need to have the role covered.
And is Ms. Markham recommending the same stipend going forward for this, or?
She is recommending the same stipend. I think it would be maybe worth your consideration as a committee as to whether or not the $2,500 is something that you'd like to take another look at. I believe, there's been a lot going on, but there may have been a suggestion either publicly or offline that perhaps we look at a $5,000 stipend versus a $2,500 stipend. The $2,500 stipend is fairly consistent with surrounding communities.
Mr. Brady.
Just to Dr. Hackett's point, I would strongly support increasing the stipend for the amount of money relative to our budget. I think a stronger stipend would at least appreciate the person who is coming forward to do this important work for us. So I'd be very supportive of increasing the stipend. Doesn't necessarily have to be 5,000, but increasing it substantially, I would be interested in.
Thanks, Mr. Brady. Mr. Nixon.
So I agree with Mr. Brady, and I'd be happy to throw out a number. I'd suggest let's make it $4,000 to start off with and see what sort of interest we get.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Mr. Hopcroft, I can see your.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I am supportive of increasing the stipend. I would make it 5 personally, but 4 is fine as well. I think it's a largely volunteer position, and it's work, and things have gone up these days, so I'm supportive of it. Thank you.
I would also like to add that I'm also supportive of increasing the stipend to $5,000. I think it's more reflective of what somebody in this position may be awarded, for example, for speaking at a conference or for offering other services rendered for their level of expertise that they're offering. So I would also be supportive of increasing the stipend to $5,000. Mr. Nixon.
So I'm totally in support of that number, if that's kind of where the majority is. I had 2 things I wanted to share. One related to this. It was not clear to me, Dr. Hackett, unless I missed it, how the stipend is paid. And that's not necessarily something the committee needs to weigh in on, but it would be helpful just to be clear. Is that paid monthly? Is it, half at the beginning of the year, the other half at the end? I presume we need to be clear about how that would actually happen. And then I appreciate too some changes that were made in the policy calling for board certification in pediatrics. Somewhere there towards the bottom, if Dr. Hackett can scroll down, there is reference to some favor towards additional training in adolescent medicine. So the only request that I want to make an observation and then a motion. Under qualifications, there's a citation, Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 53B. So that actually does not apply to us. That codifies an exception for towns that participate in a superintendency district or a superintendency union. Districts were actually dissolved back in like the late 60s, but unions still exist. That's basically for small towns that like pool their resources and hire one superintendent. So perhaps that was intended to just say Section 53 that just calls on us to appoint a physician. But our past practice with policy has been actually to avoid reference to Mass General Law, just because the law is the law, and chapters and sections can change over time. So I feel like it's cleaner to just get rid of it. But if the committee felt strongly that there should be a citation, it should definitely be Section 53 and not 53B. So that was all.
Thanks for that catch, Mr. Nixon. I don't believe this is policy. This is a job description. So I think it was just referencing it for the job description.
Right. Still maybe a good practice to not reference it.
Even in a job description.
If it's wrong, right.
I just wanted to be clarified that we also weren't changing our policy, Dr. Hackett.
Correct. Sorry, my apologies. I also, just so the committee knows, I turned my camera off because I'm having some connection issues. So
yeah. So my preference would be to just strike it. I see the superintendent's doing that, and I support that increase to 5,000, suggested by the chair and others.
If somebody would like to make a motion to accept the job description as presented with an increase to the stipend to $5,000.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? I need a roll call vote. Mr. Hopcroft.
Aye.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Mr. Nixon.
Yes.
Ms. Bolognese.
Aye.
And chair votes aye, and the vote is unanimous. With that, we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is consideration of the superintendent recommendation for a 3% increase to the 2022-23 preschool fee. This would be the increase that we talked about in the last meeting and would simply apply to the 2022-23 preschool school year. We had at one time talked about making it a recurring 3% annually. This is not what we are going to be considering today. It is just for the 2022-23 school year. If there is still some discussion, I'll take any questions on that. Or if everybody had enough discussion at the last meeting on that and understands the scope of this recommendation, then I would also be happy to take a motion.
I'm happy to make a motion unless anyone has any discussion.
I can second it.
Are there any discussion or questions before I move the vote? Then I will take a roll call vote. Ms. Bolognese,
Aye.
Mr. Hopcroft,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Brady,
Yes,
and the chair votes aye. So the vote is unanimous, and there will be a 3% increase then for the tuition to preschool for the 2022-23 school year. The next item on our agenda is also an item that we had some discussion about at a couple of our prior meetings about BDB, which was our school committee officers policy. The top of the policy had not changed. We had added the position of the recording secretary, to which Mr. Brady was voted into and is already hard at work on. So if there is no further discussion about any of this, I would also be happy to take a motion on this. Mr. Hopcroft.
I just had a really minor thing on the top part, just editing the he, she to make it non-binary.
I thought that we had already caught that and changed it, Dr. Hackett.
I think I'm looking at the version on the drive, but
We can change that today.
yeah, they or the chair.
good catch.
Thanks.
Good catch. And Dr. Hackett, just so the committee is also aware, and I will ask for a motion on this as well. Oh, sorry, lost my train of thought there for a moment. Erin has been hard at work on making sure that our entire policy manual has those changes as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. That's excellent. So I'll accept a motion on this if there's no further discussion. Always appreciate good editing.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. So roll call vote. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Brady,
Yes,
Mr. Hopcroft,
Aye.
and Ms. Bolognese.
Aye.
Thank you chair votes aye. Thank you very much. And the vote is unanimous. And we can move on to the consideration of approval of Murphy, Lemire, and Murphy for legal representation. So this firm came to us at the on recommendation, and we were able to interview them and ask them questions in the last meeting. And I'd like to open the floor for any further discussion about the about using this law firm as our firm moving forward. Or happy also to accept a motion if there is no discussion.
Just question for the superintendent.
Yes.
So can you clarify once more, Dr. Hackett, scope of services for this firm? There are some elements of their work that are not included because we have representation elsewhere, just sort of for the record, would be helpful.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nixon. Just to clarify, we are talking for Labor Counsel from this firm. We do have our special education counsel with another attorney that we've had a longstanding relationship with. There may at times, as you know, with labor and special education, there can be some overlap. This firm does have the depth to be able to also support us in those more complex questions. As well as has some experience in depth in municipal law, which is, I think, also helpful moving forward.
And so therefore, when we come to a motion, you're looking for a motion to select Murphy, Lemire, and Murphy for Labor Council for the school committee.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, thank you.
I'm happy to make that motion when appropriate, Chair.
I do not see any other hands. Is there anyone else who has a question or? Go right ahead, Mr. Nixon.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor, I will take a roll call vote. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese,
Aye.
Mr. Brady,
yes.
Mr. Hopcroft,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye, and the vote is unanimous. And we welcome Murphy, Lemire, and Murphy as our legal representation for Labor Council, and we look forward to working with them. That brings us to next meetings, which we talked about at the top of the meeting. So I will move on to recess us to executive session. We are recessing to executive session for the purpose to discuss strategy with respect to negotiating non-union administrative contracts, because to do so in open session would be detrimental to negotiation, and purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Winchester Education Association, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the committee. The committee would only return to public session for the purposes of adjournment. So therefore we will not be taking any public action as a result of this executive session, and therefore will not be reconvening.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor, Mr. Brady,
aye.
Ms. Bolognese,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Hopcroft.
Aye.
The chair votes aye, and we are adjourned from public session, and I will join you all in executive session.